February 20th, 1943, north of Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. For the German panzer commanders, the morning unfolded like a surreal nightmare. They were witnessing maneuvers that defied every principle of armored warfare as taught by the Wehrmacht. Through the dust and chaos of the North African battlefield, a small group of American Sherman tanks, broken up by terrain with no line of sight between them, converged on German positions with a synchronized precision that seemed less like strategy and more like telepathy. No flags were waved, no flares were fired. There were no dispatch riders racing between the vehicles, yet they moved as a single, coordinated organism, each tank covering the blind spots of another, each crew knowing exactly where their comrades were positioned. The German tank crews, struggling to hear their own company leaders through the crackle and hiss that overwhelmed their radios, could not comprehend it. Their 10-watt transmitters, considered state-of-the-art in the 1930s, were virtually useless when the tanks were moving. The relentless static of a battlefield filled with internal combustion engines, sparking electrical systems, and the grinding of tank tracks rendered their amplitude modulation, or AM systems, impotent. Most of their tanks didn't even have a transmitter. They could only listen to orders, unable to report what they saw or call for help. The vast majority of a German tank platoon were essentially deaf and mute, operating on a rigid pre-planned hierarchy that collapsed the moment a command tank was destroyed. The Americans, however, were operating on a plane of existence the Germans didn't know existed. They were communicating with a technological ghost in the machine, frequency modulation radios in every single tank. This was not just an incremental improvement, it was a revolution. The American radios had crystal-controlled precision, 25 watts of transmission power, and a clarity that cut through engine noise and battlefield chaos like a knife through paper. 8,000 miles from Detroit's assembly lines, the most decisive technological advantage of World War II was revealing itself. Not in armor thickness or gun caliber, but in the invisible electromagnetic waves that connected every American tank crew in ways the Wehrmacht never imagined possible. It was the birth of the networked battlefield, and the Germans were fighting a ghost they couldn't see. This transformation began on July 22, 1941, when the U.S. Army standardized the Signal Corps radio sets, SCR 508, SCR 528, and SCR 538 for all medium tanks. While German forces were advancing through the Soviet Union, perfecting their radio-dependent blitzkrieg tactics, a small team of American engineers at the Galvin Manufacturing Company, later known as Motorola, was perfecting the very technology that would render those German systems obsolete. The team included Daniel E. Noble, who conceived the application of FM technology in military vehicles, and Henryk Magnuski, the principal RF engineer, who solved the monumental challenges of installing sophisticated fragile electronics into the harsh, violent environment of a tank. Their creation, weighing 181 pounds, transformed every Sherman tank into a node in the world's first battlefield network. The BC-604 transmitter, the heart of the system, generated 25 watts of power, 2.5 times the output of the German Fu G5. Operating in the 20.0 to 27.9 MHz range, it offered 10 preset, crystal-controlled channels. The dual BC-603 receivers allowed American commanders to monitor multiple frequencies simultaneously, a capability that would prove decisive again and again in combat. The true genius, however, was in the frequency modulation itself. Edwin Armstrong's FM technology, licensed to the military, eliminated the static and interference that plagued the German AM systems. While German tank radios picked up every spark plug firing as deafening noise, American FM radios delivered clear voice communication even during deafening artillery barrages. The first test came on November 8, 1942, when Operation Torch brought American armor to North Africa. The tanks of the 2nd Armored Division landed with SCR 508 radios that would soon demonstrate their shocking superiority. The Afrika Korps, despite being the Wehrmacht's most experienced armored force, operated under severe communication limitations. A standard German tank platoon of 5 vehicles included only one or two with full transceivers. The rest had only receivers. They could hear orders, but they couldn't respond or report enemy positions. This created a rigid, top-down hierarchy that was utterly inflexible. When the command tank, easily identified by its multiple antennae, was destroyed, the entire platoon lost coordination. This vulnerability would prove catastrophic against American forces, where every single tank could not only hear, but also talk, capable of instantly assuming command functions. The Battle of Kasserine Pass provided the first major and stunning demonstration of this radio superiority. Though tactically a German victory, the battle revealed capabilities that stunned Wehrmacht observers. Scattered elements of the U.S. 1st Armored Division maintained flawless coordination across 50 miles of battlefield. Tank crews who had never met before coordinated attacks, warned each other of threats, and called for artillery support with crystal-clear communications. German signals intelligence units intercepted the American transmissions and noted their exceptional clarity. The 10th Panzer Division's intelligence section reported that American units maintained communication at ranges where German radios produced only static. More disturbing was the realization that every American tank appeared capable of full transmission, not just command vehicles. This was the great intelligence failure of the war. The Germans simply could not grasp the technological gap. Their few G5 radios, operating on AM in a higher frequency range, suffered from a fundamental flaw. The 10-watt transmitters struggled to reach 2 to 3 kilometers in ideal conditions, dropping to mere hundreds of meters when the tanks were in motion. Every electrical discharge from the engine, every friction from the tracks, generated interference that their AM systems simply couldn't filter. As American forces moved into Italy in September 1943, the mountainous terrain should have negated any radio advantage. Instead, FM technology proved even more valuable. The SCR 508's frequency modulation handled the multipath interference of mountain valleys far better than the German AM radios. American tanks coordinated movements through terrain, where visual signals were impossible, and German radios failed completely. They coordinated attacks across ridgelines that separated them, a feat that German doctrine said required visual contact. Then came the hedgerows of Normandy. As Sherman tanks rolled off landing craft on June 6, 1944, their SCR 508 radios maintained contact with naval fire support, a level of coordination impossible with German technology. But the hedgerow fighting revealed a new problem. Tank radios couldn't communicate with infantry radios, which operated on a different frequency. This communication gap proved deadly. German infantry with anti-tank weapons could approach American tanks while nearby American infantry had no way to warn them. But American ingenuity, as it so often did, found a solution within weeks. Tank crews simply mounted field telephones in ammunition boxes, welded to the tank exteriors, wired directly to the internal intercom system. This simple modification revolutionized tank infantry cooperation by late July's Operation Cobra. Operation Cobra demonstrated the full, terrifying potential of American radio superiority. The 2nd Armored Division, commanded by Major General Edward H. Brooks, coordinated over 200 Sherman tanks through radio networks that enabled unprecedented battlefield control. German defenders from the Panzer Lehr Division faced an enemy that seemed to possess supernatural awareness. American tanks responded instantly to threats reported by other units miles away. Artillery strikes, coordinated through the tank radios, arrived within minutes of target identification. The contrast was stark. Panzer Lehr, once Germany's premier armored division, was reduced to communication poverty. Most of their tanks operated without radios, depending on visual signals in terrain where visibility rarely exceeded 100 meters. The irony was profound. Germany had pioneered radio use in armored warfare. Heinz Guderian, the architect of Blitzkrieg, had insisted on radio equipment in tanks since the 1920s. His 1937 book, Achtung, Panzer, emphasized communication as essential. Yet by 1943, German tank production couldn't provide the very radios Guderian's own doctrine demanded. German production statistics revealed the crisis. In 1943, Germany manufactured approximately 5,700 medium tanks, but fewer than 2,000 transceivers. Many went to command vehicles, leaving regular units desperately short of communication equipment. Soviet tank forces suffered from even worse communication poverty. The T-34, the most produced Allied tank, typically entered combat without any radio equipment at all. Soviet doctrine relied on flag signals and pre-battle planning, with catastrophic results in 1941. By 1943, Lend-Lease provided some relief, with American radios equipping Soviet command tanks. But even by war's end, only about 25% of Soviet tanks carried radios. The comparison highlighted American achievement. While the Soviet Union struggled to equip a quarter of their tanks, America achieved 100% deployment of sophisticated FM systems. Motorola's Chicago factory represented American industrial mobilization at its peak. Before the war, they manufactured car radios. Converting to military production required complete retooling and solving unprecedented technical challenges. This production miracle ensured that all 49,124 Sherman tanks manufactured during the war received sophisticated radio equipment, an achievement no other nation approached. The tactical advantages of universal radio deployment transformed American armored doctrine. The combat command structure, with its flexible task forces, depended entirely on reliable communications. American commanders could create ad hoc battle groups from different units, confident they could coordinate through compatible radios. This flexibility baffled German commanders, who were accustomed to rigid organizational structures necessitated by limited communications. During the Battle of Aricourt, in September 1944, the 4th Armored Division faced multiple German panzer brigades equipped with superior Panther tanks. The Germans had every advantage in armor and firepower, but American radio coordination proved decisive. Every Sherman could report enemy positions instantly. Tank destroyers received targeting information from tanks they couldn't even see. Artillery observers in Sherman command tanks called in devastating barrages within minutes. Over 3 weeks, the 4th Armored destroyed 281 German armored vehicles, while losing only 41 Shermans, a 7.1 kill ratio that defied technical specifications. Throughout the war, German intelligence failed to grasp the significance of American communications superiority. Combat reports mentioned American coordination, but attributed it to training rather than technology. A captured September 1944 intelligence assessment stated, "American tank units demonstrate good radio discipline and coordination. This appears to result from extensive training and rigid communication procedures." The report completely missed the technological advantage. German tactics never adapted. They continued targeting supposed command tanks, not realizing every Sherman was a fully capable communication hub. They planned ambushes, assuming American tanks would lose coordination when separated, not understanding that radio contact maintained unit cohesion, regardless of visual contact. By March 1945, as American forces approached the Rhine, their communication superiority reached its zenith. The capture of the Remagen Bridge demonstrated the breathtaking speed of American command and control. When the 9th Armored Division discovered the Ludendorff Bridge intact, radio reports reached 1st Army headquarters within minutes. Within an hour, divisions across the entire front were shifting to exploit the opportunity. German forces, dependent on telephone lines that American aircraft systematically destroyed, couldn't respond with comparable speed. American radio superiority profoundly affected the psychological experience of tank warfare. American crews fought with the quiet confidence that they were never alone. Even when physically isolated, they remained connected through radio waves. German tank crews experienced the opposite, profound isolation. Unable to communicate, they fought individual battles within larger engagements. As one of Germany's most successful tank commanders, Otto Carius, wrote in his memoir, "Tigers in the Mud, the limited communications made true coordination almost impossible." The strategic implications extended beyond individual battles. American advances in 1944 and 45 maintained tempo partly through a radio network that German forces simply couldn't match. The Third Army's race across France depended on a radio network that maintained control across hundreds of miles. After Germany's surrender, American technical intelligence teams evaluated German equipment. Their findings confirmed what combat experience had suggested. German tanks often possessed superior armor and armament, but catastrophically inferior communications. The U.S. Army Technical Intelligence Report concluded that German tank communications equipment was approximately 5 years behind American systems. The absence of frequency modulation, limited radio distribution, and poor electrical suppression created critical vulnerabilities. Soviet evaluators reached similar conclusions and chose to copy American radio designs rather than German systems for post-war development. The radio superiority of the Sherman tank established a fundamental principle that governs armored warfare today. Modern main battle tanks carry communication suites that trace their lineage directly to the SCR-508. The German Bundeswehr, rebuilt in the 1950s, prioritized communications based on World War II lessons. A training manual explicitly states, "The defeat of superior German tanks by inferior American vehicles with superior radios teaches that information dominance outweighs platform superiority." Modern conflicts from the Gulf War to Iraq have validated this lesson again and again. The story of the Sherman tank AS radio superiority represents a victory in the electromagnetic spectrum that proved more decisive than any advantage in armor or firepower. German tank crews fought their war partially blind to this revolution, discovering too late that every Sherman was not just a fighting vehicle, but a node in history's first battlefield network. The SCR-508 radio transformed the M4 Sherman from an adequate medium tank into a component of a weapons system that included every other American tank on the battlefield. This invisible advantage determined victory more surely than any visible superiority in armor or armament. America had built not just 49,324 Sherman tanks, but 49,324 nodes in the world's first armored battlefield network. The revolution in military affairs that historians identify with modern networked warfare actually began in 1942, when the first Sherman tank with an SCR-508 radio entered combat. From that moment, warfare changed forever. The side with superior communications would defeat the side with superior weapons. The network would defeat the platform, and the connected would overcome the isolated. This transformation occurred largely invisible to German forces. They saw American tactical superiority, but didn't recognize its technological foundation until far too late. The German military's failure to recognize and adapt to this stands as one of World War II's great intelligence failures. They continued building superior tanks that fought as isolated individuals, while American forces built adequate tanks that fought as coordinated teams. In the end, the electromagnetic waves carried by SCR-508 radios proved more powerful than the armor-piercing rounds fired by German 88mm guns. The ability to coordinate, to share information instantly, to fight as a unified force rather than as individual vehicles, this invisible advantage determined victory.